around dishonest employees. And in the first one, we've looked at why employees will be dishonest. In the second one, the risk to the business. And in this one, we're going to look at preventing and disrupting dishonest employees. So here we are, Thursday. After some lockdown restrictions have been eased, I hope you're all feeling all so much better. I've had a good week. I've been out for a drink, been out for dinner, and at last got that badly needed haircut. My name's Dave Kearns. I'm Managing Director of a company called Expert Investigations. We're a commercial detective investigation agency, and I'm also Dave Kearns, fighting dishonest employees. I spent 13 and a half years in the police service. I was a CID officer and then specialised in overt and covert intelligence gathering, and 21 years ago left to set up Expert Investigations, where we are a commercial investigation company and we deal with aspects of dishonest employees, both civil and criminal. And after a few years, a few things started to become really evident to me when we were investigating these dishonest employees, that there was a consistent pattern, that it was so easy to have prevented or disrupted their activity, whether it be criminal or whether it be civil. So I started to do academic studies into it as well via one of the university courses. And I was able, and I'm able now, to fuse together the academic with the police aspect and the commercial aspect. And I still today maintain that the majority of dishonest employees, whether they're committing offences civilly or criminally, can easily be prevented or disrupted. Whether as an organisation we have an appetite to do that remains to be seen. But what we're dealing with ultimately here with a dishonest employee is not somebody who is a habitual criminal. They are not a lifestyle criminal. They are not going out there every day committing burglaries at your premises at home while you're at work, or at your workplace while you're at home. They're not breaking into your cars. They're not selling drugs. They're not habitual lifestyle criminals. The opportunity arises and they will become dishonest. So therefore then, if barriers are put in place and measures to prevent and disrupt them, then they will not be jumping through too many hoops to try and bypass whatever you have put in place. They will see that it is too difficult and the rewards may not be worth the risk that they are taking. So if we take that as a starting position, by also looking at what we have in our workplace at the moment for prevention of crime generally, or prevention of health and safety aspects, dishonest employees in the workplace, cyber attacks, there's probably an awful lot of processes, infrastructures, policies that are in place that just need to be adapted and need to be looked at and need to be tightened up. Because ultimately we're looking at bringing the risk from this to this. And we have to be realistic. We're never going to be never going to be able to eradicate risk totally. But what we can do is reduce the tolerance really significantly. And hopefully those of you that have been with us from webinar 1, 2 to 3, seeing how this is all piecing together now as we finally go into the final webinar in 2 weeks' time. So the reality is, as those of you that have heard me present before, the reality is you have got dishonest employees in your organisation, you have had or you will have. And that is a great starting point. It might not be a platform or a foundation that we're comfortable with, because we naturally want to feel that we're working with people that are law-abiding and are honest. But unfortunately, I work from a perspective the other way of thinking, how do I need to protect myself and my interests? It's exactly the same as at home here. You know, I've put crime prevention measures in place to protect home, because I know that there is a criminal element that will want to come and attack at home, commit burglaries, steal. So we have to be mature, realistic and responsible, and that has to be driven from the top. So in being mature, realistic and responsible, and understanding that this could potentially happen within the organisation, we can start to build from the foundations upwards. And we also have to work from the broad and the general all of the way to the specific. Now, when I was a young police officer and was patrolling in uniform, I always adopted an approach that if I was patrolling and I looked at something and thought, what was that? It warranted a second look. It's made me think, hang on, that has caused my attention to be drawn towards it. I need to go and look at it, investigate it, see what it was. 9 times out of 10, it's absolutely nothing and it's something completely innocent. But then on the small occasion, it is something that requires some proactivity. Now, unfortunately, the worst example of this really is probably 9/11, because although we're talking about terrorism, the country, the world was alert to terrorism. It was something that certainly in the UK we lived with for a long time. But we were used to isolated incidents. Nobody ever thought that somebody would mastermind a terrorist attack using numerous aircraft the way that they did on targets that they did. But now that it has happened, it's very much at the forefront of all aviation security and other forms of security and infrastructure security, because that is working from that broad and general. And if you and your organization think, well, for somebody to do that, they would have to do A, B, and C. Well, you've thought of it, so why don't they? And in some of the examples that I'm going to give you towards the end, you'll see how those have fitted together. Now, I go along and I do risk assessments and security assessments at a whole range of businesses. And I went down to one where they store vehicles, and they've got 10,000 vehicles on site there. And they had to have the keys left in the vehicles because back in those days, and talking 10 years ago, they hadn't got key holding facilities that could manage sort of 10,000 vehicles, and you're moving these vehicles consistently around the yard. There was a perimeter. It was weak at one area, and the area where it was weak, the CCTV was ineffective. There was a ditch the other side of the fencing, and it was just a wire mesh fence. Past the ditch, there was a bit of a hill that went down to a paddock, a 5-bar gate, and it went out onto the dual carriageway. At various other points around the compound, there were big, huge concrete blocks, about sort of so big, and they stopped any vehicles from going out the perimeter behind the fence. And at this one area, it was weak. And I proposed that they were at risk because somebody would come along with some barriers on a foggy night with help from internally from dishonest employee or employees. They would come on a foggy night when the CCT was ineffective. They would pull down the fence. They would put ramps across the ditch, and they would drive vehicles out of there, remove a 5-bar gate, and go onto the dual carriageway and drive the vehicles away. Within 6 months, it happened. But the ramps broke when they went over the ditch. So the villains went and got the 5-bar gate from down at the paddock, brought it up, put it over the ditch, and they used that as their ramps, and they took 6 high-powered vehicles out of that compound. And I'm sure I was the main subject, so the main suspect. And that's only because I looked at working from that broad and the general and the specific, and it would take somebody to be able to do X, Y, and Z. And when we conducted the investigation, we found out that it'd been coordinated internally from an employee. So we need to be mature, realistic, and responsible, that it will happen, look at the wider picture towards the more bespoke one. But this has to be driven from the top. We're looking in a lot of organizations at potentially a culture change because, as I say, we don't like to think that we've got dishonest employees within the organization, and we need to have it driven from the top, and there has to be a bark to the bite. It's pointless putting things in place if there's going to be no bark to it. So we can have bribery and corruption policies, but if they are not adhered to and there's no bite to them, it's pointless having those. And again, employees, just because you have those policies doesn't mean that they won't be dishonest or criminal. And you have to adapt to the change. That change can come by the fact that you are upsizing or downsizing. It could be the fact that you have taken on a new premises. It could be the fact that under COVID now, we have got more people working from home, working remotely, not as much supervision, using different systems. Control measures are not in place, and we have to adapt. Now, when we're looking at this aspect of dishonest employees, we're looking both civilly and criminally. So obviously we're looking at theft and fraud, and your frauds being everything from asset misappropriation, procurement fraud, ghost workers, expense fraud. Theft can be theft of any product, any finished product, any process used, any item or process within that manufacture of a product. But we've also got other offences that will fit between the two. So we've got here things such as theft of data. On the previous webinar, I explained that is the highest growing theft within the commercial organisations at the moment. Theft of data and the impact that can have with a dishonest employee stealing that and going to another company. And I've literally had a phone call from a lawyer this morning where we're going to deploy a surveillance team on Monday in relation to an investigation of that nature. What about long-term absenteeism, false absenteeism, people off long-term sick? They're being paid 3, 4, 5, 6 months. They're coming back to work for a couple of months. They're going back off again. This is another element of dishonesty within the workplace. And drugs in the workplace, as I've mentioned before, again, is another area that cannot be dismissed, whether it be growing, so cultivating cannabis plants, making drugs, selling stolen goods. The element of that dishonesty by employees is both civilly and both criminally, and that's why we need to look at the whole thing sort of from, as I say, this mature, realistic, responsible approach from both the civil and the criminal side. Most organisations will have what we call situational crime prevention measures in place that I've spoken about before. They're your alarms, your CCTV, your uniform guarding, access controls, biometrics, software, your bells, your bolts, your whistles. And it's how effective these are in preventing dishonest employees, because I often say, people put these in place to protect their business. So if you come to our business, to our office, it's barrier controlled. You're met by reception, you're signed in, you're given a badge, the building has got CCTV, there's a safe in the office, there's X, Y, and Z, all these situational crime prevention measures. But how effective are they when you're looking at employees that are being dishonest? Now, when we're looking at preventing and disrupting dishonest employees, I consistently see that these measures are in place, and actually, if they were implemented better and managed better, and in some occasions just tweaked for purpose, they would be an excellent tool for preventing and disrupting the dishonest employee. But often the dishonest employee, or employees generally, will know what those purposes are. Guards are there to sign visitors in, there's a CCTV working, but nobody actually watches it or monitors it. Half of the cameras don't work. Access control, I can guarantee the majority of you people that are watching from a manufacturing perspective especially will know that you've got colleagues that will, in the hot weather, jam open fire doors and doors that are meant to be closed in order to get an airflow through. Automatically a breach of your situational crime prevention. So we have to look at how effective these are, but by looking at them, we can really turn them and use these as a proactive tool for the prevention and the disruption. Now, on the first webinar, we quickly went through a few recent cases. Now, all bar two of these are this year. And just as a reminder, and for those that have joined us for the first time on this webinar, these are employees. These were not criminals. These were employees, good law-abiding citizens, your neighbours, your friends, somebody at your squash club, your golf club, somebody who you socialised with, a family member. So here we've got here a lady, £60,000 to pay off credit card bills from a council. Wendy Dillingham. I was personally involved, our company were personally involved in this investigation. Lady lived in a nice rural location, no criminal record. She stole actually £300,000 from the business. You've got a chap here who's involved with clearly criminals externally from the business. But he's working for a bank, so he will no doubt have gone through significant security checks in order to get employment within the first place. Julie Nicholson, £2.3 million she stole from her business, and we were involved with the investigation of this one as well. She's not a criminal, she is. She wasn't a criminal when she started at the business, and she'd worked there for years, and she became a dishonest employee. Charity sector, £73,000 stolen for a house deposit. And you'll see these are from all around the country. Gang stole £320,000 from Worcester Hospital recently. So this was this year. And a Preston DWP worker awarded themselves £12,000 in universal credit. So many of these could have been prevented and disrupted as opposed to being detected. And certainly on the two cases we worked with, it was just simple to have prevented this in the first place. The fraud triangle, which I refer to for theft, fraud, and in fact all elements of employee dishonesty, both civilly or criminally. And those of you that have followed me know that I talk about this an awful lot. So sorry if I'm giving you the same slide again, but it is integrally important. And for those of you that haven't heard me talk about this before, I'll quickly explain. So it's opportunity. An employee will identify the opportunity to commit whatever element of dishonesty they will within the workplace. They will rationalize their actions, and the motivation will always be for financial remuneration. They are not doing it for charitable and philanthropic reasons. And there is a whole raft of studies as to why individuals become dishonest, whether they are high up the hierarchical chain or lower down the hierarchical chain within an organization, it makes no difference. And it's where that tipping point comes. And we've talked about this in the previous webinars, but that tipping point has come and your employee has decided to be dishonest. But that's because they've identified the opportunity there at the top. Now, by working from the broad and the general and the specific and looking at what situational crime prevention measures you've got in place, you can massively reduce that opportunity straight away, which therefore then will affect their rationale as to whether they want to take that risk for being dishonest. Because as I said at the very beginning, these are not lifestyle criminals or habitual criminals that are going to look to try and bypass realistic barriers and prevention methods that you put in their way. If your methods and your processes and your policies and procedures are not strong enough, then it's easy for them to bypass them and have that opportunity. It's also easier when you've got more people involved. So when you are looking at employee dishonesty, it's harder to detect it, and the cost is always significantly more when you have two people involved. And equally, the higher up the management chain, the hierarchical chain that you go, again, the costs are significantly higher to the business in loss, and detecting it and identifying it becomes significantly harder. So it is about reducing that opportunity. So if fraud is discovered by, and this is because there are no figures for employee dishonesty, and I've done a freedom of information request, and the information that comes back there's nothing there really that's workable. So the ACFE, the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners, do an audit every 4 years, and this is what they've said with regard to fraud. And I see this actually mirrored when I go into companies with all elements of dishonest employees, that it's tip-offs, which is the main way that dishonesty is found. And that's not necessarily tip off by another employee. It could be by a vendor, by a customer, by somebody else. It could be any way, not just a formal whistleblowing policy, a whistleblowing procedure. And 11% is by accident. So we've got 49% here that if we address into it, we can actually take that loss of capability of 49% and turn it on its head, so we can really use this as being a preventative and a disruption measure. How are we using our internal audits? Are they effective for purpose? And a management review, how is that effective for purpose? Do we need to change that? Surveillance and monitoring, it's only 3%, and yet so many businesses see that protection for them is via CCTV and access controls. But that's only one part. And that is not always designed at preventing dishonest employees. And we'll come on to some aspects with regards to CCTV and the part that it plays. And IT controls, bizarrely, are only 1% of how fraud is discovered. So if we actually look at that slide, and we've got 40% with tip off an accident, if we put that all together and say, how do we work on that 100% to be able to use that to reduce the opportunity for employee dishonesty, there are 6 facets there that give us a really, really proactive opportunity of doing that. Many of you may have heard of red flag indicators. You can look at them online. There's lots of them. These are the main ones. And again, they show that we actually have nearly 50% opportunity of reducing the opportunity again. Now, we're not always going to know. So it says here in 85% cases, fraudsters displayed at least one red flag indicator. You'll be surprised actually as well how many times I see that 1, 2, or 3 red flag indicators have been ignored by businesses. But you're not necessarily going to know if somebody is living beyond their financial means, or if they're having financial difficulties, or they're having personal problems. But actually, when you're looking at 20%, 15%, and 13% on unhealthy closeness with suppliers and customers, excessive control issues, which is a key one, and a wheeler-dealer attitude, we've actually got there nearly 50% that we can drill into. And again, as per the previous one of how the fraud is discovered or dishonesty is discovered, we can again take that risk from here and put it down here, significantly reducing it, because they are things that we can visibly see and work on. And when people have been caught, and this again is based on fraud, when they have been caught, and again, I see this from when we conduct the investigations or I do an audit, you see that there are lack of controls or controls have been overridden. And in those cases, there's 6 or 7 cases there with the slides of the employees that were dishonest. They have all overridden controls, or the lack of controls were absolutely not in place or not adhered to. So you've got 49% there, which is pretty ineffective. So again, by drilling into those, because that's your starting point to look at what controls you've got in place and strengthen them up. And a lot of these don't actually cost to implement. It's not as if you're ordering 100-foot of palisade fencing or new CCTV systems or a new biometric system. You're probably looking a lot of time at policies and procedures that are in place and making sure that audits are done correctly and supervision is carried out correctly. So you've got there management review, poor supervision. That's again something that we can rectify really, really quickly. And if we've got a poor culture at senior level, started at the beginning by saying this has to be driven from the top. If you've got it driven from the top, it's cascading down. This information, this training, this risk can be passed all the way down through departments so that you are reducing that opportunity. And all of these so far have costing minimal spend. So you must, as a business, create a culture to prevent and disrupt your employees. You have to know your vulnerabilities and your weaknesses, and you personally might not know those vulnerabilities, and colleagues sitting around your meeting room, whether it be at board level or whether it be at operational level or regional level, might not know that vulnerability. You sitting in HR might not know the vulnerability of finance, and finance might not know of operations. One of the starting points I always go with, I go to the people in the departments and say to them, how would you know if there was ghost workers on the payroll? How would you know if somebody was committing expense fraud? How easy would it be to do? And the amount of times that you will get people say, it's as simple to do as X, Y, and Z, and I've said before we ought to implement this procedure and this will stop it. These are people, these are your good employees that are working within those departments that have identified your weaknesses for you. And by knowing and understanding your vulnerabilities, department to department within the whole business areas in silos and the whole business collectively, you can know where your weaknesses are, whether that is your weakness on policy of dealing with people that are long-term absent, who have been that thorn in your side for 6 months and are costing you time and financially, whether it is understanding your vulnerability for somebody leaving the organization and taking your data. And that example there might be just the fact that when somebody leaves or puts their notice in, that you stop access to various databases that they have. But if they've been planning this, the minute they tell you, they've already have probably done and taken that data over the preceding months anyway. So in understanding all of your vulnerabilities and weakness, you can secure them and make a critical, honest assessment of how you can deal with them. And you can't think that it won't happen to you. Because again, I consistently go into businesses to present to them and I'll say, don't worry, it won't happen to us. And yet then they find themselves somewhere down the line being a victim of dishonesty, and have action plans for investigation and detection immediately. If you've got something that is a blueprint that you can pull out of a drawer and follow that. So we've got a false absenteeism issue. You've redressed it in the fact that you've now become more proactive. You can pull that out of the drawer and you can start to implement that action plan. The same with somebody that is leaving and you think they might take data. The fact that you may have somebody that is, your information has come to you about theft from the night shift, theft at the weekend, theft from lockers, somebody's raising false suppliers. Have that action plan so that you can literally kind of get into your war room and deal with it proactively straight away. Because employees generally don't think they'll get caught and they don't think that they will receive a harsh punishment. So therefore, you need to create within that culture that you are this good, working, supportive organization that are there for your employees. But for dishonest employees, if they believe they're likely to be caught, receive a harsh punishment and a quick punishment, then you will massively reduce the opportunity of employee dishonesty. A couple of quick studies which I'm going to look at in much more detail on the 4th webinar in 2 weeks' time. We're going to show you how we do conduct the investigations. With Operation Fraud, even with the fraud, Wendy Dillingham had sole responsibility for the accounts within a small business of 12 people. She was a personal friend of the MD. The MD trusted her. It wasn't in his nature to think that she was going to be dishonest. But actually, if he came from a position to think, okay, I've got this individual, I do trust them, but I need to put simple mechanisms in place, he would have stopped her stealing £300,000 and she would not then have gone to jail for 5 years. Operation Wainstalls was Julie Nickerson stole £2.3 million from her business. She was a really horrible, cantankerous woman within the workplace, and nobody understood how she was working her systems. Nobody wanted to work with her, and nobody was strong enough to supervise her. The slide there that's showing sort of poor senior management and lack of controls and excessive control issues, this was Julie Nickerson all in one. To actually implement a procedure or a situation to reduce that opportunity wouldn't have actually costed any money. It just took strong management, strong people. And it was only when she left the business, when the business was bought out by another one, that hole in the accounts was found. In Operation Wales, £250,000 worth of catalytic converters were stolen. This is a site that had CCTV, it had guards, it had barrier control, and yet an employee was able to bring a transit van on site. The catalytic converters were in a secure locked cage unit in the warehouse, where there was a key that was hung up on the wall. And these catalytic converters were moved by a forklift truck that only 2 people could drive, and there was a code access for it. And the offenders committed the offence because during a canteen break, when lunch break, when everybody went off to the canteen, the employees concerned went and got the key, opened the cage. They'd arranged with one of the other colleagues to get the code for the forklift truck. They got the code for the forklift truck. The transit van had come round the back of the site, and the catalytic converters were taken out and they were put into the truck. But everybody knew that the CCTV was really ineffective, and round the back where it was actually loaded into the truck, the CCTV didn't work. And the catalytic converters were taken straight out of the business, again through the guards, past the guards, a quick wave at the guards. So all of that situational crime prevention measures that you got in place was no use whatsoever for preventing the dishonest employees, was really limited in detecting the dishonest employees, but was so simple. If somebody had control, and this security and this element of dishonest employees was driven from the top, because those CCTV cameras should always be checked. Employees are not allowed to bring vans on site. There's just simple things that you can implement that would prevent and disrupt that dishonesty by those employees. And that business at the time were making redundancies as well. Operation Measham allowed a lady in an accounts department to sign checks off to herself because she was a signal signatory on those checks. I'll miss the last 2 because we're running out of time, but basically the one was drugs within the workplace in a void location, and we're going to talk about this one of how we investigated this in the next webinar. But again, it was something as simple as somebody just having a responsibility to check the void locations within the business. So much of this is simple to prevent and disrupt because we're not dealing with those hardened criminals. So it is about changing that perception and putting those barriers in place that do not stop you running operationally and cost effectively. And they're not things that you're putting in place that are going to cost significant amounts of money. Now, in some businesses there are, and I'm working with one at the moment, and it's a big security issue at the moment because they are relocating their business. They know that there's a lot of capex that's going to go in relation to that project, but so much of it is so simple. Now, it needs to be driven from the top with boardroom education. Now, unfortunately, I've got to give you a bit of a sales pitch here, but I deliver this boardroom seminar and presentation, and we work through a book here. And this book is basically what we're covering through the four webinars. Now, that is going to make your board understanding, your senior managers understand the risk of dishonest employees to the business. What it's also going to do, it's going to prevent them being dishonest, because if you've got an MD, an FD, an HR director, operations director that are being dishonest, are thinking of being dishonest, then the fact that they've had this seminar and all of their colleagues are sat around the room, you've just put a shot straight across their bow that you, their colleagues, now know the risk, how to identify it and how to deal with it, how to prevent and disrupt it, and then, if needs be, how to detect it. But it's amazing when you see the reactions from board and senior management that they suddenly understand their vulnerability because their vision is elsewhere on the business, not on the subject of dishonest employees. The second thing that you need to do is conduct that gap analysis and a vulnerability test to you and your business on all areas of the business, on the thefts, on the frauds, on the civil side of it with theft of data, with drugs, harassment, bullying, subversive individuals in your business, working from that broad and general to the specific. And where required, you need to get some basic investigation and interview training so that you can conduct your investigation and find out if the information you've got is correct, if policies, procedures, etc. are not being followed right, and you are actually finding evidence that is going to be required for an internal discipline and disposal of somebody from the business or for something that you are going to give to the police. So we say that it's a three-tiered approach. And I always say to people at this point, it's actually now time to act on the subject of dealing with dishonest employees. So just to close, as I've said in the previous webinars, do connect on LinkedIn. There's a lot of information that I'm putting out there and following on Facebook and Instagram. I'm going to send you the recording over of the webinar, so please feel free to share it amongst any colleagues and amongst any business groups or networking groups because it's an education. We've got to educate people to the risk. Please don't ignore the risk and don't think that it won't happen to you or within your business. And don't miss the final webinar in 2 weeks' time, because there I'm going to show you how we conduct surveillance operations, undercover operations, how we interview and statement take, and how we have had to catch these dishonest employees. So I'm mindful of the time now. I am going to stay here just for a few more moments. If anybody has got any questions, then please fire them up on the chat pod. But failing that, contact me if you've got anything that you'd like to discuss, and hopefully I will see you in 2 weeks' time, and have a great week. Bye-bye. Okay, so I haven't got any questions there, so cheerio.